Hello petals, my name is Anais. I am a womb witch, a Rahani energy teacher, and a plant alchemist. Under Unfurling Alchemy, I guide women in reconnecting with their power, awakening their essence, and step into sovereignty. In these episodes, I am going to approach topics around womb mysteries, energy healing, and cyclic living. Hello, my petals. In this episode, I want to talk to you about being in between versions of yourself. Because I just feel like there is a particular kind of feeling lost when we have this deeper knowing that we are no longer who we used to be, but we're also not quite this new version of us yet. That new path hasn't revealed itself fully. And we are kind of like in that in between where the old version doesn't fit anymore, but the new one isn't quite ready yet, isn't quite fully baked yet. And so we are like in that in between, and in that space, there can be like just so much loneliness, so much like frustration and grief. And I just feel like that this is a part of like the healing journey that we don't talk about enough, that awkward in-betweener that happens in absolutely every healing journey and every spiral of the journey. So if this is where you are right now, this episode is absolutely for you. So what the in-between actually feels like, let me try to describe it a little bit to you, because I think sometimes when we put words, specific words to something, it helps to shift. The fog becomes like a little bit less foggy, or the disorientation becomes a little bit less unsettling, because you realize that it actually has a shape and a name, and therefore it is something that we can actually move through. So the first thing that you may notice, if this is where you believe you may be, is that, your old shoes just no longer fit. Not obviously literally, but the life that you were living, the identity you were carrying, the version of yourself that you have been showing up as, it has started to feel a little bit tight, a little bit uncomfortable, like something you have outgrown without quite realizing what is happening. And you've put it on in the morning and something in you is resisting it. Not in always like a dramatic kind of way, but just this very persistent sense that it just doesn't quite fit anymore. And that can also be, for example, within your friendships, within your community, the places that once felt like home and now they just feel like they belong to a different chapter, right? Those are still people that you love, but that is what is making it complicated. It is not that anything like went wrong. It is that you have grown in a direction that the friendship was not built to follow. The conversations that used to nourish you, you feel like they're like a little bit hollow right now, or your values just no longer align, or the way that you want to be in the world just has started to shift. And the things that you used to bond over no longer feel like the truest expression of who you are. And you find yourself, in those spaces having those feelings and maybe just starting to feel a little bit like out of place, or all the way out of place. And it's hard to explain without like sounding ungrateful or superior or strange, or like, feeling like you are in the wrong here. And so the old maybe like community, the old friendships, they don't fit anymore. But also, you have not quite found your new people yet. You haven't quite found your new tribe yet. And you haven't found this new community, those new friendships that you are looking for. So the old doesn't fit and the new hasn't quite arrived yet. And you are really craving to have like those people that match who you are becoming, the spaces where the conversation go where you want them to go, like the topics that you are so passionate about. But right now you are like in that gap between the community and the friendships that you have outgrown and the one you haven't found yet. And that gap on its own has a particular kind of loneliness. And it may even be that you are deciding to still participate in the community and in the friendships that are no longer serving you because you don't want to be in that space of just complete loneliness. But you are still showing up, but actually within yourself, it's making you feel even more lonely because you can feel like that gap. And yeah, I think that is like, that can be a really big topic around that, being like in that in between. And that can also be true into like our romantic relationships when we have grown so far away from who we used to be, but our relationship hasn't grown with us and the person that we are with hasn't grown with us. And when, yeah, they're not willing to meet this new version of ourselves over and over again, that distance can grow. There is also a moment that I think is one of the like most quietly destabilizing in that in between. And you are in a conversation with someone and someone asks you about yourself and you start to answer and you start to describe yourself the way you have always described yourself before. And then you stop kind of like mid-sentence because you realize that what you were about to say is just no longer quite true. And that description that you have been carrying just no longer fits the person you are in the process of becoming. And yeah, you do not know yet the one that is replacing it. So this could, for example, look like, I don't know, like you were about to say that actually you party a lot, right? Because that used to be like your previous way of being, your previous lifestyle. And then you kind of go to say that, and then you're like, actually, I don't anymore. Like, actually, I've been sober for 6 months. Actually, I spend most of my time in the forest nowadays. But actually, that person that you were about to describe used to be you, but it's no longer matching your current reality. But you haven't quite yet fully embraced and leaned in into this new identity that is still like really fresh and that feels quite like not the clay hasn't set quite yet, right? So the moment of that stopping, of not knowing how to finish that sentence, yeah, that is when we really see like that in between, when that in between stage that we're in really is visible, and this can also look like the teachers, the guides, who words used to really land with us so deeply and now somehow feel hollow, This may be like the yoga class that you have attended for the last 4 years and used to be your favorite space, but now every time you go, it just doesn't feel the same anymore. The words aren't landing anymore. The books that used to feel like they were written directly to speak to you, for you, and now like they are just not landing anymore because they belong to an earlier version of you. And the practices that used to make you feel alive, and now you're kind of just going through the motions as you are still trying them out, but it's just like that inner landscape has changed. And it can be like super frightening because you think like, what's wrong with me? Like, I've always liked this, like, or since being on my healing journey, I've always enjoyed doing, I don't know, conscious connected breathwork, let's say, right? And now suddenly it's not hitting anymore. Like doing it with this person that has been my guide for the last 3-4 years, it's not doing it for me anymore. So what has happened, right? This used to work, this used to move me, so why doesn't it work anymore? And it's this realization that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You have simply outgrown this past like you have outgrown this past version of yourself. You have grown past like that specific medicine, that particular medicine. And yeah, the next one hasn't quite arrived yet or hasn't quite revealed itself yet. And yeah, that can be really uncomfortable because underneath all of this, there is like this fog, right? There is this haze, a sense of not being able to see the path ahead clearly, of knowing that something needs to shift, but not being able to make out what that something is or where the hell it leads. And yeah, like just that feeling of like standing at this edge, the edge of something without being able to see what is actually like on the other side. And that fog can be like so exhausting because we are so conditioned to know where we are going, to have a plan, to be deeply again within like our masculine, and to have a plan, to have like a direction, to have like a list of how we're gonna get there, like very masculine energy, very Virgo energy as well, but we are really conditioned into what is your 5-year plan, right? So that whole part of like being within the feminine mysteries, to allow, to surrender, to lean into the void, to lean into the uncertainty, that is like really uncomfortable, or that can be extremely uncomfortable. And because like when we are also like on that part where we are like in that haze, we are unable also to not only see for ourselves, but also to explain what the hell we are doing to people around us. We can't explain our direction. And in that in between, there is no clarity to offer, neither to us nor to others. And it just offers uncertainty. And sitting in that uncertainty, especially when you're also sitting in that loneliness and the grief and the frustration, it can be a really crunchy, difficult part of the healing journey. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the emotional texture of the in-between. And I want to just stay here for a moment because I think the emotional reality of that in-between deserves to be named honestly, and again, deserves just a lot more attention than what I think it is getting. Because this isn't about something needing to be fixed or shift or moved through as quickly as possible. This podcast isn't tips on how to come out of the in-between as quickly as possible, but more about like acknowledging that there is something real here that is being asked to be felt. There is that loneliness in that in-between, as I mentioned before, and it's a really specific kind of loneliness because it's not always the loneliness of being alone, but the one of being surrounded by people who knew previous versions of you and cannot quite see the one you are becoming. The one that is holding you to old stories and old versions of you, of being in rooms where you cannot be fully yourself because the self you are becoming doesn't have yet enough form to really be shared, of carrying something like inside you that you can't quite name yet, and therefore you can't bring it into relationship with others. Because there is no clarity for you, there is no clarity to be shared. And that loneliness can be really real. And I just also want to say that it's okay to feel it without immediately trying to solve it, without immediately going into, I'm gonna go to 15 networking events to try to find new friends that are more aligned to what I don't know yet, because I don't know yet to what I'm aligning myself, but I'm gonna go and find them. And so I just feel there is like that grief as well in that in-between, the grief of what is falling away, of the friendships that are quietly, or sometimes not so quietly, dissolving, of that identity that served you well but just no longer fits, of the version of you that you are leaving behind, even though leaving her behind is, the right thing to do, there can still be a level of grief in the uncomfortableness of it all. Even when you know that the newer version of you is going to be truer, the next version of you is going to be truer, it's going to be even more aligned, it's going to be just unfolding, unfurling another layer of authenticity and reclamation. There can still be some grief in the process of leaving the old behind. And in that whole process, there can also be a heavy dose of frustration. And often I think that this is the hardest one to actually be with. Because the loneliness and the grief can have like a texture that most of us have a level of practice with. But the frustration, the sheer frustration of the fog, of not being able to see clearly, of knowing something is shifting but not being able to make it move faster, or feeling like you are in limbo, you are in a waiting room for your own life. And that frustration can be relentless in a really particular way, because it has no clear objective and there is nothing to fix. There is nothing here to change. There is nowhere to direct it. There is just waiting, the not knowing, and the haze. And that frustration, again, is not necessarily a sign that you're doing anything wrong. It's not a sign that you have taken a wrong turn or that the path is not there. It's a sign that you are in the passage, you are in a threshold, and that threshold can take time. And from my own experiences, I also find that the more you resist the threshold, the more painful the whole experience is. The least you surrender, the more frustration comes up. The more you are impatient, the longer this journey or this part of the journey is going to feel. So, I want to share something personal from my own experience and journey. When I moved to Southampton, for to do a placement as part of an Erasmus program. And I didn't think that I was going to stay. And then life happened and things changed and shifted. And I stayed to live in Southampton. And because of the romantic relationship that I had found myself in, the one that I've mentioned here many times before, that was very roller coastery and one of my absolute greatest teachings and greatest teachers. And I have absolutely no regret to have been in that relationship, but it also came with a level of challenges that have allowed me to do some life-changing work. Really. But because of that relationship and the dynamic that we had and the challenges that my partner at the time was coming with, I lived a very isolated life. And I had not really built any deep connection. Because there was always a sense of that Southampton wasn't going to be my forever home. That I was going to move at some point. And I remember pretty much as soon as I arrived here, I was like, okay, when can I move? As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to move. And I had a clear message that I still had things to do here. So here I still am in Southampton many years later. But during that flavor of my life, because I had this sense of not staying, I didn't want to build any deep relationships, but then also my romantic relationship wasn't really allowing for that in my life. And so I didn't really want to invest time and effort and make a lot of space for something that wasn't going to have deep roots and that wasn't going to withhold time. But I did have a group of people around me. And we had so much fun together. There's especially one summer that I remember so beautifully and so keenly. There was really a summer of fun, of eating, of dancing, of drinking, of laughing, of countless Aperol Spritz and gin tonic, and there was real joy in it. But also a hell lot of escapism. And I think I knew at the time that I was escaping, but with hindsight, it's even more ridiculous to look back at it and just see just how much escapism there was. And yeah, I was working in marketing at the time, and I was having a quite good salary, and I was living on my own, and so I was always out and about and traveling and eating out, and yeah, just having like a very active kind of like time. And yeah, it was like a very enjoyable part of my life. Or at least I'm looking back at this with like, I had a lot of fun, and I had absolutely no regrets about that part of my life. But also, I knew that things weren't like that. I wasn't always sitting with the things that need attending, let's say, and I was filling the space so that the quiet couldn't get too loud, so that I couldn't really notice how empty my home felt, so that I couldn't really notice how surface level my relationships here were, and how much loneliness there was actually underneath all of it. And so at some point I made a decision, and I decided that it was time to stop escaping, and that the things I had been running from just needed to be turned outward and turned towards rather than away from. And in that moment, I found myself completely alone. I was just out of the romantic relationship, the roller coaster we were on, and I was in a country I didn't grow up in or didn't really study in. And the people that I had spent time with, the ones that I had been escaping with, I just realized that those connections, they were not built to go where I needed to go next. They were built from that version of myself that I was in the process of leaving behind. And so there was nobody. And I want to say that quite plainly, because I think there is a tendency in the healing spaces to skip past the really hard parts, to move quickly to the lesson or the reframe or the growth. But the truth is that what I truly felt like was lonely. And not just a little bit lonely, not uncomfortably lonely, but the kind of loneliness that sits in your chest and doesn't move. The kind that makes your evenings feel super long and your mornings are very quiet. The type that makes you want to just stay at work when you know that is just another form of escapism. And yeah, what it took to move through that was a level of vulnerability in a way that I had not quite practiced yet. Putting myself out there in new spaces. Once I was in a position where I could actually be with myself and find it enjoyable. And then from that space, allowing myself to broaden my horizon and allowing myself to be unknown and uncertain and not fully formed in front of new people. Experiencing the heartbreak of connections that did not go where I was hoping them to go. And the slow, patient, sometimes painful work of building something real from the ground up. And I think for me there was a lot of heartbreak in this as well, because as I was meeting people whilst myself not being in that final newer version of myself. Final maybe not, because the spiral always continues, but I had gone through this big journey of going through that threshold of leaving this old version of myself behind, and patiently or impatiently waiting for this new version of me to fully emerge. And somewhere along the way I decided to go out and meet people and meet my community, but because my clay wasn't fully dry, because I hadn't quite figured out yet who I was becoming and what my values were and what I was standing for, I also then aligned myself with people and made friendships and connections based on an unfinished version of me. And that meant that throughout time, then there was like heartbreak into connections that actually, when I stepped deeper within the authenticity of who I am and deeper within the sovereignty of who I am, when more masks went and got broken down, and more assured I became in who I am and who I want to be in the world, some of those connections then also were not aligned anymore and had to go. And there was like a level of grief again that came with that, of like having thought that I had found my tribe now, that I had done this work, and then accepting that because the clay wasn't quite dry yet, some things needed to move and change. And I also really want to say that that doesn't mean that I think that you should be staying in a cave, staying in a hole until you know who you are. I think it's actually like really beautiful and healthy to go out and see different ways of being and different ways of relating, and the different options that are out there as well. And I feel there is so much to be said to be like in community when we are like in that threshold space. It is just that maybe mindful like reminder that also means that there will be also some changes that will also still unfold within your future, and that is perfectly fine as well. And for me, it took time, more time than really I wanted to. And there were many moments in that threshold, in that passage, where I could not see anything was being built at all. Definitely gave me kind of like bamboo vibes, of like building for 7 years downward and then suddenly it shoots up. But that initial like building felt like absolutely quiet in the fog, out of sight, but there was something that was being built. And now fast forward, I just want to say that I have this beautiful, gorgeous community around me that I could have not imagined from inside that loneliness at all. People who really know me, people who see me, people who don't get offended by my ways, that don't raise their eyebrows when my mischievous humor comes out or when I swear like a sailor, who matches who I actually am rather than who I used to be. And the depth of those connections is only possible because the in-between me are moved through to get there. And yeah, I could not have found them. I could not have found those people in this previous version of myself. I had to become who I am first. And becoming who I am, becoming who you are, always requires a passage, a threshold. And that comes with the fog, the loneliness, the not knowing, all of it. And so, yeah, I just want to say that you are not lost, okay? So I want to offer you something, like not a fix, not a shortcut, just a different way of holding where you are. You are not lost. You are in between versions of yourself. And those two things feel similar from the inside, but they are fundamentally different. Lost implies that there is somewhere you should be and you cannot find. Between versions implies that you are exactly where the process requires you to be. That is not a deviation from the path. That is the actual path. The in-between is not a mistake. It is the necessary passage between who you have been and who you are becoming. And you cannot skip it. It cannot be fast forward. It has to be moved through. And here is another thing that I found to be true. The fog of that in-between, it is not empty. It's actually full. It's full of the dissolving of what no longer serves. Full of the quiet forming of what's next. Full of the work that is happening underneath the surface. In the places you cannot see. Preparing the ground for the next version of you to emerge. You cannot see it yet, but it is happening. Very much like that phase when we are looking at winter moving into spring and it looks like winter is lasting forever and nothing is happening. But actually underneath the ground, things have been stirring and stirring and stirring and stirring. And someday you just wake up and bam, you have the first snowdrops, you have the crocuses, you have the buds coming out. But for me, in this, I've always felt this more to be like a cocoon. And that's the image, that keeps coming to me whenever I talk about that in-between. Because what happened inside the cocoon is absolutely not gentle, no tidy, nor comfortable. The caterpillar does not simply grow cute wings inside the cocoon. It completely dissolves. It becomes mush. It becomes, for a period of time, formless. And what it was in the full process of becoming something entirely different gets dissolved. And from the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. It just looked like a small case hanging from branch, still unremarkable, seemingly doing nothing. But everything is happening. It's just not in a way that is visible yet. And the in-between is also like that. You are either in the cocoon, in the full disillusion of who you were, in the fog and in that formlessness, and the not knowing it. Or maybe where you are right now is that you're just out of it. You're just out of your little cocoon and your wings are newly formed, but they're not dry yet. They're not dry yet. They are not yet ready to carry you. They're still fragile. They're still finding their way, finding their shape. And in both those places, the temptation is to rush, to try to force the wing to dry faster, to try to get the next thing before the next thing is actually ready. But the butterfly that is pulled from that cocoon before the process is complete cannot fly. The struggle of emergence is actually part of building the strength in the wings. The in-between is building something in you, even if you cannot recognize it right now, even if you cannot see it, even if you cannot feel it, even if it's just like fog and loneliness and waiting. But I promise you, it is doing something. So with this in-between, I'm not going to tell you what to do with this, because I generally do not think that this in-between is asking for you to be doing more doing. It is asking for something quite different, actually. It's just asking you to be in it. To not fill the space so quickly with the next identity or the next community or the next teacher that you that will interrupt what is not quite completed yet. Because if you fill that space before it is ready to be filled, you will carry pieces of the old version into the new one that, are not quite ready to be left behind just yet. And those pieces, they will ask for your attention again later at a deeper layer of the spiral. And if this is where you are now, know also that is fine. Everything will be exactly perfect how it's supposed to be. And maybe this will be part of the teachings for you. But I just want to tell you like that you don't need to rush this. I know it's uncomfortable, but what it is really just asking of you is presence. It's honesty. It's a particularly kind of courage that doesn't look like bravery from the outside. The kind of courage of sitting in the fog without demanding that it clears on your timeline. Or being in the loneliness without immediately reaching for something to make it go away. Of grieving what is falling away without trying to hold on to past times of the good old days. And alongside that, if there is one piece of advice that I can give you, is see how much you can lean into surrender. Not the passive surrender of giving up, but the chosen surrender of just releasing the grip on needing to know what comes next before it is ready to be known. And I know, it's easier said than done. I know it because I've lived it, and am a recovered control freak, or recovering control freak. Many Virgo placements. And so I know surrender, learning how to surrender, working with Passion Flower in that ally of surrender has been and keeps being one of my biggest teacher. And I know how hard it is to surrender when you are in that fog and in that loneliness and that frustration and not being able to see it. And then know that your mind wants to fix it and figure it out and find a way through it faster. But in this case, there is no faster. There is only through. Going through it. And when you come out on the other side, just knowing that it's leading you somewhere worth the threshold. So again, I just want to say one more time, you are not lost. You are between versions of yourself. You are in a cocoon or just out of it, wings not yet dry, not yet ready to carry your full weight into the skies and onto the wind. And there is nothing to fix. This is something to trust. The fog will clear. Not on your timeline, but it will clear. And when it does, you will find yourself somewhere you could have not arrived as the previous version of yourself. Surrender as much as you can. Work with Passion Flower. Trust the process as much as you are able to. And be gentle with yourself in this threshold. Because you are exactly where you need to be. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, my petals, and I see you in the next one.